Welcome, everyone, to Authors on the Air. I'm your host, Pam Stack. We are proud to be part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. I have the honor of speaking to award winning author and my colleague in the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, the fabulous Jennifer Ann Gordon, who hosts Vox Vomitus and will soon be joining my show as an ongoing guest host with things that scare Jennifer to death. It's going to be so much fun. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome.
Hi, Pam. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm thrilled to have you here. You know, I love talking to you. Most times it's either we're texting or on the phone together.
And exactly. And I feel like it should be more professional every once in a while than just us.
Why?
Well,
it's us, you know.
It's us.
This is our family.
Our first interview together.
I know, this is our family. You know, I want to jump right to it because I want listeners and viewers to know that you not only are a writer and a host, you have such an incredible curriculum vitae. Your catalog is so amazing. You are a professional dancer. You had a dance studio before COVID. You are a mixed media artist. You're a photographer. You are a muse, I know to many. You host several podcasts, and you write dark Victoriana and horror. You know, it amazes me all your creative aspects, but somehow they're all woven together. Tell me what you wanted to do when you were young.
I was torn between, this is a great question. I was torn between being a actress or a dancer or a detective / FBI agent. Like I thought like I wanted to solve crimes and I didn't know what it was, but like a forensic psychologist. And I still wanted to be that for many years until I realized I had to do things like run a mile and I had to like train really hard to be in the police academy. And I was like, ooh, those things I don't want to do at all. I don't want to run. And so then I thought, like,
look at blood.
And then look at blood. And then like, what if there's an eyeball thing?
Right.
What if it's like a hurt animal? Like all of these things. And then when I went to college the first time before I switched to an art school, I took a lot of psychology classes. And again, wanted to really get into like abnormal psychology and what makes, criminals tick or what makes people into monsters, I guess. But again, it got to a point where I'd have to take a math class. And every time I got to that point, I just switched majors to something else. Until I finally couldn't put off math any longer. And then I just switched colleges completely and went to a fine arts college and majored in acting. So
have you acted in the past?
I have. So I went to the New Hampshire Institute of Art for theater, and I acted for quite a few years with a theater company, a professional theater company called New Art Theater. Also at one of the largest regional theaters in New England, the Palace Theater in Manchester, New Hampshire. I worked with them quite a bit, and I did a little bit of community theater, but mainly professional. So yeah, I loved it.
And what made you change professions again or switch your artistic endeavors to something a little bit different?
Well, actually, I left New England. I moved to the Midwest for about 12 years. And when I got to the Midwest, I really didn't know anybody. I didn't know very many people. I didn't know the theater scene. And I just kind of like became a little bit of a hermit. And that's when I started concentrating on art and painting and things like that. And I had a very successful Etsy shop, and I sold mixed media art that was Victorian based. And I do have a book collection out of all of those paintings I did during those years, which is called Victoriana. It's available everywhere. So I did that for many years. And then I missed performing and I missed dance and theater. And that's when I took my very first ballroom dance lesson and met my now husband.
Who, by the way, is my producer.
I know. I was going to say, who is your producer? Who is Roman? He is weirdly in the background of this interview right now.
He is indeed. Thank you, Roman. So you two, well, first of all, I want to say you couldn't find an arts or a theater scene or an art scene in Ohio. Is there actually an art scene or theater scene in the Midwest?
In Columbus, there is. We did a lot of dance performing in and around Columbus. There is an art college and a huge university, the University of Ohio, or no, Ohio State University. Sorry, I switched schools. They're both in Columbus. So it does produce an awful lot of young, eager performers. So there is an art scene there. I wouldn't say it's bustling. It wasn't bustling when I was there, but there was a lot of opportunities. There was a ton of galleries and a ton of little clubs that were always hosting strange performances and
Right.
burlesque performances, and art festivals where Roman and I could do like 1 hour dance pieces that were all improvisational and strange. And we definitely were more into like performance art at that time.
Well, when I picture the Midwest and especially Ohio State University, I'm thinking football,
Yeah,
and
well, that's pretty much it.
yeah,
But
yeah. So you also do photography.
yes.
And I've looked at some of your photographs and they're very dark and they're very emo and they're very I don't know. They are Victorian in nature, but you like old places, correct?
Yes, very specifically love abandoned places. And when I lived in the Midwest, more so than when I'm here now in New Hampshire, I would do a lot of urban exploring. My Roman and I would, break into places and like old poorhouses and abandoned hotels and abandoned houses and things like that. And we've done a road trip to visit different Victorian era mental institutions and prisons.
Wow.
So those are the things I love to photograph. It's kind of why I love Europe so much, because everything there is old and kind of
Yeah.
decaying and could be haunted.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I love that.
Absolutely true. And then you changed again and you were writing. Now, I know you've written all along, but
Yeah.
what drove you to start writing Victoriana and horror? Because you are an award-winning author in the horror genre, which is making such a huge comeback right now. I mean, more and more. I know you've interviewed a lot of really great horror writers. Josh Mallerman on your show. You've just talked to a lot of people.
It's been great.
Why why did you decide to write?
Why did I decide to write? So the first book I wrote was Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, and that is the book that not only won the Authors on the Air Award for the Best Horror Novel of 2020, it also won the Kindle Award for Best Horror and Suspense of 2020, and a couple other finalist things. That book, Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, I thought of it way back when I was in college, and I thought of it as a 3-person show. And I thought the core idea of that show was going to be what happens if a man gets away with murder, but for the past 60 years of his life, until he's now a very old man, if he's been haunted quite literally by the ghost of the woman he murdered. So that was my core idea of this play. But then it just, to me, I wanted the ghost to be incredibly visceral and ethereal and wet. And I thought it would just be almost impossible for me, on no budget and not having a professional theater company, to stage this play.
Right.
So the story started then, and it just kind of lived in my head. When I was writing independent comics back in Ohio, I tried to find a graphic artist because I thought maybe it would be a good graphic novel, but I couldn't find the right person. And then, I don't know, about 4 years ago, I got very tired of telling myself I couldn't do things. And I sat down at the computer and I said, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to write. I don't know if Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent is a poem. Is it a short story? Is it a novella? I don't know what it is. But I knew it had been in my head for way too long. And I had to get the story out. So I started writing. And I keep telling people that it took 20 years and then 3 months to write. But 20 years of me telling the story to myself in my head every day.
But it's a continuum on the creative process line there.
Yes.
It just seems like the next natural thing. I know that you are enjoying writing. I know that you're that you always have ideas floating around in your head. You and I have spoken hours about ideas, and they're all terrific. Is there something you still want to do that you haven't tried yet?
Oh, just like artistically in general, or
Sure, anything.
um, I don't want to say no because I probably just haven't realized it yet. I've always wanted to be a private detective.
So
I'll
have I.
say that.
So have I.
Yeah.
Always.
So,
I
so
told you we were our
yeah.
DNA is mixed up somewhere.
Yeah, I had a dance student for a few years who was a former FBI agent and he had retired. And every lesson, I was just like, let's start a private detective business. Like, you can do all the business stuff, and I'll just be like the girl in the bar snapping pictures of cheating husbands. And he was just like, it's more than that. And I'm like, I'll figure it out.
That's so funny.
I'm easily trainable.
There you go. Your newest book, let's see it, is called Pretty Ugly. And interestingly enough, it's a beautiful cover too, by the way.
Thank you.
Now, I want hold it up just a little bit longer for me, please. I want everyone to notice that the woman on the cover is wearing a mask. Jennifer started writing this book. Thank you, doll. Thank you. Before the pandemic.
Yes.
And just a coinky dink, one of those, things that you have no control over, that the book released, and then we were hit with, an international pandemic.
Yes, I always want people to know this is not a book about COVID. It's not a book about the mask debate. It is
or
not
the vaccination
about, or the vaccination debate. It's not about any of those things. It is, at its heart, a story about two broken people as they face what is probably the end of the world. It does involve a virus, but this is more of a flesh-eating bacteria virus type of thing. So the reason they wear masks is to hide the fact that if they did survive, now their faces are terribly scarred. So it's a mask that it helps protect people against the virus in some ways, but mostly it's about hiding. And the story is about an Instagram influencer and a failed politician, two people who spent their entire lives pretending to be fictional versions of themselves. And then this virus hits and it ruins the one thing they had to protect them against the world, which is their face.
Right? Yeah.
So it's a story about these two people and how they figure out who they really are when they can't be who they've been pretending to be.
That's such a great premise. When you are sitting down to write, are you looking at the characters first, or are you looking at the idea for a story? I don't know if, because you are so visual and you are so creative, do you see the character first, or are you imagining the story first?
I think it depends. I will say for Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent and Pretty Ugly, I had a very vague concept of what I wanted it to be. So for Pretty Ugly, I knew that there would be a virus. I knew the very last scene.
Interesting.
I knew kind of one thing kind of in the middle where it transitions from being in the United States to a train in Italy. I knew like three things, but I had no idea who these people were until I started writing about them. So then it definitely becomes about the characters. I'm definitely more literary driven than plot driven.
Yes.
It's about my characters. I write in an incredibly lyrical way, as you know. So it's a mixture of like poetry and prose. And the same thing, I think, with Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent. I had a concept. I had the what happens if a man gets away with murder. And then I added in a third character, which was a man who lost his wife and his son in a car accident. And what happens if these people, one person who's consumed with grief, a ghost who is consumed with revenge, and an 82-year-old sociopathic murderer who is still consumed with rage. What if these three people get trapped in a house together? And maybe that house is haunted. So like I had a concept, but then went with like, who are these people and what makes them tick?
You said that you knew what the ending was. and you had a kind of a spot in the middle, and you sort of had a concept. Do you, when you're writing, do you write sequentially, chapter 1 to 2 to 3 to 4?
I do. And you know, that's always served me pretty well until recently. Now I'm working on a couple projects and I've gotten to this point where I'm like, oh, I really want to do a flashback, but I can't because it's not sequential. And sometimes I'm holding myself back. Sometimes I just have to open up a different Word document and kind of, as my show title calls it, Vox Vomitus, I just have to word vomit out into a different document.
Right, right.
But I do try to write the story or the structure of the novel sequentially. I've, to this date, not really skipped around.
I'm just curious because sometimes when I'm reading, like I just finished a book, a paranormal book, as a matter of fact, that flashback to before Christ, and then but was set in the present day. But the story was so relevant, the way it jumped back and forth into the past, and then the epilogue was into the future, and it worked. It doesn't always work.
It doesn't always work.
Sometimes you're like, what in the heck? But there was a purpose to it going back. It was historically accurate, which was really nice. But when readers can see the purpose for a flashback and you know what has driven the writer to do that, if it's cohesive, when it works beautifully.
Exactly. I will say, you know, I have flashbacks in my book, Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, and they're very strategic.
Right.
There's just a few, and will fight it to the death. They were necessary, and they were necessary at the moments that I gave you a flashback.
Right. You're not doing paragraphs of flashback. You're doing just a snippet of time to give it context, correct?
Yes. Or every once in a while, I'll do like a chapter or an interlude.
I see.
As if it's music. There's like a little separate section that can kind of float above the rest of the story.
Interesting.
But it's needed.
When you sit down to write, are you completely zoned into what you're doing? Do you need peace? I know that in your new house, you have your writing attic, your writing turret.
Tower. Yes, I am in a turret. I'm like the Lady of Shalott.
You really are. Has it always been like that for you? Can you block out ambient noise easily?
No. For many years, I was living... we were living with my mom and, a cat and 2 birds and a dog. And, there's a lot going on, a busy road. So I would be locked in the bedroom. Normally, I would have headphones in with white noise playing because I need something to kind of block it out. I don't do well with distraction. I'm not one of those writers that can write in front of the TV, like half watching a movie, half writing a novel. I know people who do that, and I applaud them. I wish I could.
I have guests who tell me they listen to show tunes, like theatrical music, and
I couldn't do it because I'd be singing.
There you go. So you need absolute peace and quiet. Is scent a part of your writing process? Do you burn a candle, or do you want totally neutral space?
I need it neutral. I mean, I don't mind the sound of like water, like waves would be fine. Rain is fine. Wind is fine. A fan, anything. But I don't usually do music unless I'm at the point in the book, where it's almost like a movie playing in my head. Yeah. And I think if this was a movie, this is the song that would be playing during that scene.
Interesting.
Then I'll play that specific song and pound out the scene. I'll just put the song on repeat.
Do you do playlists with your books, by the way?
A little bit, not a full playlist, but I usually have, I'll say like 4 or 5 songs that are like the soundtrack songs.
As you know, I read a lot of books, and so in some books they'll give the Spotify playlist that goes with each of the chapters. And what I have discovered from that is I don't know music anymore. I have no idea who half the people are. I've never heard of them. I have to go to my YouTube channel or to Spotify and see if I like the music. And then I got to pray I like it, because then it like kind of messes up the chapter for me if I don't like the music.
I don't know contemporary music at all. At all. So usually if there is a song that's like part of my soundtrack, it's like it's a classic that either everybody knows or they know a version of it. Sometimes I'll like hook onto a cover version of a song,
Right,
but
right.
normally
Speaking of
it's
music,
classics.
I've asked this before in when I post on Facebook, but if you had to choose three albums, music albums, which would you choose?
I would choose the soundtrack to Les Miserables. I would choose Damien Rice's O, and oh golly, Johnny Cash.
Wow.
I feel like it's one of the albums he did right before he died. I want to say it was called either The Man in Black. No, it wasn't The Man in Black. I can't remember the name of the album, but it was the one where he covered Hurt and
Yeah.
all of those like contemporary songs that he did in his very beautiful Johnny Cash way.
How fun. I have very eclectic tastes in music too, so I can listen to probably anything. I don't care how loud it's blasting. If I'm reading, I don't hear it. I don't even notice it. So, unless I stuck earbuds in, and then I wouldn't be able to read because I'd be
Yeah.
too busy listening to the music. I want to talk to you a little bit about craft. You are kind of an all genre girl, but with a few exceptions. I know you're not a romance fan, but you are a fan of really interesting crime fiction, as
Yes.
well as horror and suspense and speculative fiction and all. Is there a meetup between horror and crime someplace? Do they
I
cross over?
To me they do. I feel like they're kissing cousins because I mean, I love all horror, monsters, vampires, werewolves, all of it. I love it. But what I write, like what I really love, the stuff that speaks to my soul is when the monster is a person. And maybe they're a
It's
person
always a
because
person.
it's
Yeah.
always a person.
Yeah.
And I also love the idea of like maybe the ghost isn't a ghost, maybe it's memory, or maybe it's a hallucination. So I try to tell people, I'm like, I always write, there's a ghost in every book I've ever written and probably ever will write, but sometimes it's not a ghost. Sometimes it's just a memory. So to me, I mean, people, like I said, when I was little, I wanted to be an FBI agent. I wanted to
Right.
be an actress. So I'm still somewhere between trying
Yeah.
to figure out what make people tick.
People pick, yeah. Well, in Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, obviously, you're looking at this 82-year-old murderer. There is the crime right there, and his rage is still there, and there are his victims coming forward. So you've crossed over pretty well on that. I haven't read Pretty Ugly yet. I don't know if you talk about where the virus started, if it was just happening in nature or whatever. But can you be a crime fiction writer who does horror, or a horror writer who also does crime fiction?
I think you can. I mean, I definitely think you can. I mean, if you read Paul Tremblay, he's an
Yeah.
amazing horror author. But his first two novels, The Little Sleep and No Sleep Till Wonderland, are incredible crime fiction.
Yes, they
And
are.
even his novel Cabin at the End of the World, there's a crime aspect there.
Right.
And, so, I mean, to me, we'll say Silence of the Lambs. Is that a horror movie or is that a crime movie?
Right. That's true.
It's both.
Different.
Hannibal, is that horror or crime? And that's kind of where I want to be, that sweet spot, somewhere in that dark, mucky,
So
messy, beautiful world.
horror to you is not necessarily ghosts and goblins and things like that.
No.
Horror to you is a much broader genre, I'm assuming.
Yeah, to me, horror is fear and what I'm personally afraid of.
Right.
And
Right.
sometimes I'm afraid of a ghost, but other times I'm afraid of whoever's walking behind me on a street and I'm the
Yeah.
only person there. Sometimes I'm just afraid because I walk into a house and the wallpaper doesn't seem right. And and other times I'm just like petrified that a serial killer has been watching all of my podcasts and now knows where I live. It's just I
Yeah.
have like these very specific things.
Fears.
And
Yeah.
I think horror is this something that horrifies you? Is it something that horrifies the reader? I think crime and horror can be the same thing. I mean, Stephen King does it all the time too. It's like,
Yeah. Well, that's true.
yeah.
That's true. Yeah, I have a very narrow understanding of horror because it's not something that, I mean, listen, I'll be honest, when Vincent Price was making black and white films, I couldn't even watch those. Bela Lugosi and all that, those things make me crazy. I get too afraid of those. And I will admit the one Stephen King movie I watched was Carrie. But other than that, it's.
But have you seen Shawshank Redemption or The Green
I
Mile?
have.
So
I have.
see,
I know. I know. Things can be horrifying. I understand what you're saying now. Things can be horrifying and not and still be crime and still be, I mean,
they can be horrifying and still be like literary fiction, because
yes,
I know like Pretty Ugly and A Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent have always like they are usually like kind of lumped into literary fiction or
yeah.
even grief fiction or books about trauma, but they fall in like the horror place, the
Yeah.
horror umbrella.
Even some science fiction does too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, it's horror is a big category with a bad reputation sometimes.
Maybe that's right. And I don't know. And excuse my ignorance because I really don't know that much about it. A lot of horror is derived from comic or graphic novels, isn't it?
A lot of current horror can stem from there. Yes,
Yeah.
There's a lot of really good horror comics.
Interesting. Tell us what's new for you. What are you doing these days, and what can we look forward to seeing from you?
Well, I am working on one top secret project that I can't really discuss, but I am excited about it.
Good.
And I'm working on another. Usually I don't work on two things at once, but I'm also working on a bit of a novella, which combines the idea of a haunted house along with the memories of what it's like to be giving elder care to somebody who has Alzheimer's. So the story is really, are these delusions Alzheimer's delusions, or is it a haunted house? And what happens if, yeah, so I like to play with that. Is it mental illness? Is it a ghost thing? A lot in my writing. So this is kind of a story told in vignettes.
You are also going to come on and cross over to Authors on the Air every so often. So I'm very excited about that. What are we going to be talking about? Hear from you. What are you going to be talking about?
So the show, my offshoot of Authors on the Air will be called Don't Scare Jennifer to Death. And it's a take on the old movie Don't Scare Jessica to Death, or Let's Scare Jessica to Death. And I will be talking not only with horror writers, but also with true crime authors, maybe some police officers, some detectives, maybe a mortician or two, about all sorts of things in the very dark genre of what makes people tick.
I love it. And I'm so glad. Would you show your book again, please? Friends, the book is called Pretty Ugly. You can find it. There is a bookstore near you. Denton's, is that right? Gibson's, that you can go ahead and get signed copies from. Otherwise, you can go to your usual online bookseller and buy it. I encourage you to go to Jennifer's website. It is spectacular, jenniferannegordon.com. You also are on weekly now on Vox Vomitus, which is part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, where Jennifer and her Vox Vixen co-host, Allison Hubbard-Martine, speak to writers about the things that go wrong, and sometimes they go horribly wrong.
Sometimes they go horribly wrong.
In the writer's room. So, when you're 40,000 words into a book and you go, well, this is just crap, and you have to throw it away. I mean, that would horrify me.
I was gonna say that's the true horror story right there.
For a writer, it would be, right?
It is.
I hope that where else can we find you in social media?
I am. So if you go to my website, as you so lovely said, it was beautiful, jenniferannegordon.com, there are links to my Instagram, my Facebook, my Twitter. I'm also on an app called Slasher, which is like Facebook for horror lovers. It is only available on your phone, but that's the Slasher app. So if you're a horror fan, you can go there. I'm Jennifer Ann Gordon pretty much everywhere.
And you'll see her photography, her mixed media, all of her books. You'll learn a little bit about it. You have a really interesting way of describing yourself, your bio. Would you like to share that a little bit, please?
I can never remember which version is on my website, but I want to say I use the phrase, she's a ghost who's scared of ghosts.
Yeah. She was a very quiet child. Great of everything.
Strange, curly haired. It's true. I wrote it like a little fairy tale, but go to my website. That'll force you to go there and read it.
Absolutely. And absolutely go by Vox Omnibus. It's a fun show. It is the top rated video cast in the entire network. And yay. And I also want to thank our producer, Roman, Jennifer's husband, my producer. And I want to thank all of you for paying attention and dropping by to visit with us. And thank you, Mom and Dad. I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.